Maybelle Laurent lived quietly among ghosts, some dead, others very much alive. The Laurent estate still stood, just off Rue de Varenne, not far from the ministries and embassies of Paris's old guard. But inside its weathered stone and whispering halls, the air smelled of wilted flowers and secrets long left to rot. Time had peeled back the gilded wallpaper, just as society had peeled back the Laurent name from its gilded frame, leaving nothing but a tarnished portrait of former glory. Maybelle rose each morning before dawn, as she had since she was 15, to tend to routines no one noticed. She oversaw the cook's purchases, ensured the aging boiler didn't cough itself into death, checked the balance of bills left unpaid under ornate silver trays. Her siblings had long fled the wreckage, Henri to Boston with his socialite wife and bloated startup dreams, Viviane to Milan where she curated art and collected lovers. Maybelle had stayed, because someone had to, because her father had grown too frail to speak and her mother too proud to acknowledge decay. She didn't resent them, not truly. What would be the point? At 28, Maybelle had been labeled and shelved, the quiet daughter, the forgettable one. Not beautiful enough for attention, not sharp-tongued enough for rebellion. Even her voice had the soft, apologetic tone of someone who'd been shushed too often and learned to obey the silence. But she watched. She watched the world move outside her windows, cars humming past to places she never visited, parties flickering through the walls of neighboring townhomes, and laughter drifting from cafes she'd only seen from across the street. She watched and she read, and she remembered things no one thought she noticed. She didn't hate her life. She didn't dream of grand escapes or love at first sight. Such indulgences belong to people with choices. Maybelle had obligations, legacy, and expectations, those heavy, unseen chains she carried with more grace than most could bear. On Thursdays, she visited her father in his sunroom, reading him the news in a voice that rarely trembled. He blinked slowly, occasionally twitching a finger to signal comprehension. On Fridays, she attended her mother's luncheons, not to dine, but to hover near the tea service, replenishing lemon slices and pretending not to hear her mother's veiled apologies to guests. "She's quite reserved, our Maybelle," her mother would say, lips pursed, "but terribly devoted. She doesn't seek attention." The guests nodded politely, their eyes sliding over Maybelle as if she were part of the wallpaper. Maybelle smiled. She was used to disappearing. But beneath the resignation, something else stirred. It came late at night, when the house fell silent and the Paris lights painted fractured shadows through her bedroom window. She'd lie awake, sketching facades of imagined homes in a tattered notebook, homes with high glass ceilings and secret gardens, homes without secrets at all. If she'd been born to a different family, perhaps she would have studied architecture, or written novels, or built something of her own. But fate, like fashion, was rarely kind to women like her. The day the letter arrived, it was raining. The downpour blurred the windows, turning Paris into a watercolor city. Maybelle sat at the breakfast table, her tea untouched, eyes on the storm. Her mother entered without greeting, her silk slippers muffled on the carpet. "An offer has come," she said simply, dropping the sealed envelope beside the teacup. Maybelle's gaze didn't move. "From Henry?" "No," her mother said sharply. "From someone that matters." Maybelle lifted the envelope. The paper was thick, embossed. The Moreau crest gleamed faintly in the dim light. Her stomach nodded, not in fear, but in recognition. Damienne Moreau.
She'd heard the name whispered in the salons, murmured over crystal glasses and behind painted fans. The billionaire recluse, the storm in a suit, the man who'd bought 3 companies in a single week and ruined 4 enemies before breakfast. Women gossiped about him like a myth, tall, brutal, unreadable, handsome in the way wolves were, beautiful only to those who didn't mind bleeding. Maybelle set the letter down. What does he want? Her mother didn't sit. A wife. Silence expanded like smoke between them.
"I'm not beautiful," Maybelle said. It wasn't a protest, just a fact. Her mother shrugged. "He doesn't want beautiful. He wants discreet, compliant, a Laurent." Maybelle looked back at the rain. The room smelled of overripe fruit and old perfume. "What do we gain?" she asked quietly. "Everything." And there it was, the truth. It wasn't a proposal. It was a business transaction. Maybelle stood, walking slowly to the hearth. She didn't tremble. She didn't cry. She thought of the endless years ahead, tending this house, this father, this legacy that had never loved her back. She turned, and her mother raised an eyebrow, expecting objection. Instead, Maybelle said, "Then I want terms." Her mother blinked. "Terms? I'll marry him, but I won't be his ghost. I won't be someone he forgets the moment he signs. If I agree, I get to define what this marriage looks like." Her mother stared at her, unblinking. Then, just barely, she nodded. Maybelle left the room with the letter in hand. In the privacy of her chamber, she opened it. The script was handwritten, sharp, controlled. "Mademoiselle Laurent, I have no desire for flattery, pretense, or sentiment. I require a partner who understands discretion and duty. I do not offer love. I do not promise kindness. I offer protection, alliance, and clarity. If this suits you, we will speak. Damien Moreau." Maybelle read it twice. Then she smiled, not because it was romantic, but because it was honest. And honesty, in her world, was the rarest luxury of all. Damien Moreau was a man better feared than followed. Where Maybelle moved like a ghost in her own home, Damien was a storm sealed inside a man-shaped vessel, tall, broad, and immovable. His reputation did not walk into rooms. It arrived 10 steps ahead and slammed doors behind it. Every board member, every investor, every socialite worth their salt had heard the rumors. That he'd fired a CFO for using the word maybe. That he'd refused to shake the president's hand at a gala simply because he didn't want to. That he'd bought a century-old Parisian bank not to own it, but to shut it down and erase its founder's name, because that man once humiliated Damien's father in public. And yet, no one knew him. The tabloids tried. They caught glimpses at airports, inside bulletproof town cars, the rare moments he emerged from one of his offices. They pieced together fragments of a life he never volunteered. A childhood spent under the thumb of Auguste Moreau, a warlord in a 3-piece suit. A brief stint at the Sorbonne, which he left without explanation. An empire built brick by bloody brick, each acquisition quieter and more devastating than the last. He lived alone in a modernist fortress outside the 16th arrondissement. Clean lines, black marble, silence. His only known companion was a shaggy black dog named Umbra, rescued from a kill shelter during a thunderstorm. No one dared ask why. His housekeeper, Madame Roux, had worked for the family since before Damien was born. When pressed about her employer, she once replied, "He eats like a soldier, sleeps like a soldier, and trusts no one, except perhaps the dog." Still, women pursued him. They tried at art showings, galas, boardroom introductions.
They studied his drink orders, his clothing habits, his known associates. But Damien didn't entertain them, not out of cruelty, but disinterest. He didn't need warmth. He didn't seek beauty. He lived with precision and detachment. And the only time his pulse changed was during war, of business, of legacy, of control.
His empire, vast and liquid, had enemies, quiet ones, old ones, the kind who waited, not for weakness, but for distraction. And his father's death, still fresh in the headlines, had left the vacuum. That's when the idea had come, not to him, to Lucien Chevalier, his chief advisor and godfather, a man of clean suits and dirtier secrets. "You need insulation," Lucien had said one evening over bourbon, "not just strategy, blood, ties, respectability. The wolves are circling. They can smell mature alone." "I'm not interested in pretense," Damien had replied, eyes locked on the window. Paris shimmered below, unaware of the war unfolding in penthouses above. "Then don't pretend," Lucien had shrugged. "Make it real. Marry. Align yourself with a legacy older than yours, even if it's hollow. The Laurents are crumbling, but the name still commands a certain nostalgia." Damien had paused. "Henri Laurent is a joke." "True, but his sister isn't." He didn't ask how Lucien knew. That was Lucien's job, to know things Damien didn't care to uncover. "She's quiet, educated, no scandals, no desperate social climbs. She won't cling, and if her father dies, she inherits a small but historically relevant estate. And she's invisible, the perfect kind of visible." Damien had said nothing. He'd walked to the corner of the room where Umbra lay curled near the fireplace. He knelt, resting a hand on the dog's side. Umbra stirred, then settled again. Lucien waited. Eventually, Damien asked, "Will she expect affection?" "No," Lucien replied. "I doubt she expects anything." That's what sold it. Not romance, not politics, stillness. A wife who would not demand his time, rearrange his space, or draw attention to his vulnerabilities. He drafted the letter himself. No lawyers, no handlers. And then he waited. Days passed. No reply. He didn't pace, he didn't call. He waited with the stillness of a man who had buried every form of urgency inside stone. But something gnawed at the edge of his thoughts. Not fear, not anticipation, curiosity. When her reply arrived, it wasn't a yes, not entirely. It came in the form of a formal courier, leather envelope, handwritten note. "Monsieur Moreau, if what you seek is a mirror, something to reflect your silence, then I am not your match. I will not be handled, hidden, or erased. If, however, you are willing to offer the same terms you demand, clarity, discretion, and honesty, then perhaps we can begin. Maybelle Laurent." It wasn't bold, it wasn't arrogant, it was simply clear. Damien read the letter 3 times. The 4th time, he smiled, just barely. That night, he left his office at 10. Umbra followed him to the glass wall overlooking the scene. Rain fell in soft silver lines across the city. Damien watched it in silence. "She's not what I expected," he murmured. The dog said nothing, but leaned against him. 2 days later, he requested a meeting. Not at a restaurant, not a salon, a private salon in the back of the Musée Rodin. After hours. No press, no guests, just marble and ghosts. Maybelle arrived 15 minutes early. She wore a navy coat, no makeup,
and shoes that looked borrowed from a nun. But she walked with posture, and when Damien entered, she didn't flinch. They didn't shake hands. He gestured toward a bench. She sat, not close, not distant, just present. "You're not what I imagined," he said at last. "I hear that often," she replied. "I don't offer sentiment. I didn't ask. I don't want interference. Neither do I." A pause. "I won't apologize for who I am," he said. She looked him directly in the eyes, and for the first time in years, Damien felt the sting of being seen. "Then we'll get along just fine," she said. They talked for 27 minutes. At the end of it, neither smiled, but both stood, looked one another in the eye, and nodded. It wasn't a beginning. It was an agreement. And in Damien's world, that was the most intimate thing of all. Neither Damien nor Maybelle spoke of the meeting afterward. Not to friends, not to family, not even in the privacy of thought. It was not the kind of meeting that needed to be processed. It was complete unto itself, like a signature already inked, cold, clean, absolute. But the consequences rippled. Within the week, word trickled through the upper circles of Paris, not as an official announcement, God forbid such fanfare, but through the subtler channels of rumor and raised brows. "The Moreau boy is taking a wife," someone whispered at a gallery. "The Laurent girl, of all people," another muttered over martinis. It made no sense, which, in their world, made it true. In the Laurent household, the reaction was more immediate. Her mother descended into motion, orchestrating fittings, caterers, and guest lists with the breathless zeal of a woman who'd forgotten her own irrelevance. Maybelle didn't resist. She let her mother fuss, let the maids trail her with garment bags and color swatches, let the noise rush past like wind through a tunnel. Her decision had already been made. The rest was ornamentation. The day of the formal agreement, she wore ivory, not white. White was for innocence, and Maybelle had long abandoned such illusions. Damien arrived precisely on time. He wore no boutonniere, no trace of softness, only a slate gray suit that made him look carved from the same stone as the Rodin statues he so admired. They signed the marriage contract in a private chamber of the Palais de Justice. 3 witnesses, no champagne. Afterward, Damien turned to her. "Is there anything else you want included before this is filed?" Maybelle considered him for a moment. "Just one." His brow lifted, the faintest movement. "I want autonomy," she said. "Whatever I earn, build, or choose to create, I want it to remain mine." There was no pause, no argument. "Done," he replied. It was the first moment she felt like she'd walked into something resembling power. That night, she stood alone in her room, the final draft of the contract in her hands. The ink was dry, the terms immovable. The name beside hers read Damien Laurent Moreau. Her name read Maybelle Laurent. She hadn't taken his name. He hadn't expected her to. A knock broke her thoughts. Her mother entered, eyes bright and shining in a way that unsettled Maybelle more than she liked to admit. "You'll be living with him, of course," she said. "The Moreau estate in St. Claude is—" "No." Her mother blinked. "Excuse me?" "We've agreed to split our time between his residence and mine, alternate weeks. He'll have one wing, I'll have the other. There's no reason I should leave my father." Her mother's mouth flattened, but she didn't object, not out loud. Maybelle folded the document carefully. "This isn't a rescue. It's a merger, and I intend to hold my share." She moved past her mother without waiting for a response. The wedding itself was almost indecently quiet.
No floral arches, no live music, no six-tiered cake to photograph for the society pages. The ceremony took place on a Tuesday, with only the legal minimum of witnesses. There were murmurs, of course. The society vultures who expected spectacle were starved. Some said the bride had insisted on the small affair out of modesty. Others claimed the groom simply didn't care. Both were wrong. It had been mutual. They did not kiss at the altar. There was no proclamation of love, no dove release, just a shared glance as the registrar announced them husband and wife. That night, Maybelle moved into the Moreau estate for her first week as Madame Moreau. The house was as she expected, all glass and steel, silence and shadows, clean, orderly, empty. Umbra greeted her with one bark and then padded back to her bed near the hearth. Damien offered her a tour, which she accepted, not out of necessity, but courtesy. "This wing is yours," he said, gesturing toward a wide hallway framed by minimalist art. "Bedroom, study, library. You can furnish or redecorate however you want." "And yours?" she asked. "Opposite side. We'll share the kitchen and the garden if you want it." She didn't ask if he spent time in the garden. She already knew he didn't. By the third night, a rhythm had formed. They didn't eat together. They didn't cross paths unless necessary, but occasionally they'd pass each other in the shared corridor. A nod, a silence, a glance held too long. It wasn't romance, but it wasn't absence either. One evening, Maybelle found herself wandering the property. The garden Damien rarely visited was overgrown, but not wild, still shaped by intent. She crouched beside a dying patch of herbs and ran her fingers through the soil. Dry, neglected. When she turned, Damien was watching her from the glass doors. He didn't speak, just tilted his head slightly as if surprised she'd ventured outside. Then, without a word, he walked back into the house. The next morning, she found fresh bags of soil and potted herbs by the garden wall. No note, no instructions, just presence. It became a pattern. She made changes in quiet ways, rearranged the furniture in the reading room, opened the drapes in the hall, replaced cold white bulbs with warm yellow ones. Damien never commented, but he didn't undo her changes either. One night, after a rare shared dinner at the request of a visiting investor, Damien poured her a second glass of wine. She noticed his hands were steady, precise. "Do you regret it?" she asked. He looked up. "Regret what?" "This arrangement, this merger." He studied her. "Do you?" She held his gaze for a breath too long, then shook her head. "No." He didn't smile, but his eyes flicked to her mouth before returning to the glass in his hand. Later, when she returned to her wing, she found a copy of Le Corbusier's architectural essays placed neatly on her desk. No note. She didn't need one. It wasn't love. Not yet. But the terms were shifting. For all the clarity that had defined their agreement, marriage, real, lived-in marriage, was a far messier beast. In the weeks that followed, the house settled into a rhythm that wasn't quite peace, more like ceasefire, neither hostile nor warm. Two people with sharp minds, heavy silences, and private wounds orbiting each other in precise, predictable loops. Maybelle spent her mornings in the garden she'd revived, replacing dead roots with jasmine, thyme, and night-blooming cereus. She rarely wore makeup, preferred soft linen dresses to the designer scraps her mother once forced her into, and never once asked Damien where he went when he disappeared for hours at a time. He, in turn, made no demands. He rose early, exercised in the gym 2 floors below, and read the Financial Times with the focus of a man preparing for war. His breakfast was always the same: Black coffee, boiled egg, sliced apple. His movements were as mechanical as they were deliberate, like a man who'd built a cage so perfect he forgot it had no door. They lived in parallel, until they didn't. The shift began slowly, almost imperceptibly, in the cracks between moments. She left a book open on the counter and he closed it for her. He forgot to mute a business call one night, and she heard his voice tighten, not with anger, but something that sounded like disappointment. She began drawing again, not in secret, but without apology. On one particularly silent afternoon, he passed her study, paused, then doubled back. "You designed this?" he asked, eyes scanning the sketch pinned to her easel. She didn't look up. "Yes." "It's good." She blinked. Not because of the compliment, but because of the softness in his voice. A thread. A flicker. "You've never mentioned your interest in architecture," he said. "You've never asked." Another silence, but this one held weight. "I should have," he said, then walked away. It wasn't tenderness, it was tension, the kind that builds in air before a storm, not because something has broken, but because something is about to. Then came the gala. It was an annual charity event hosted by the de Brienne family, one of the few occasions where Damien's presence was expected, not requested. He rarely attended with a date. Maybelle, by virtue of being his wife, was now expected to fill that role. She prepared quietly, wore a gown she'd chosen herself, steel blue, structured, clean lines, hair up, lips painted wine dark. She wasn't trying to be beautiful. She was trying to be exact. When she stepped into the car, Damien glanced at her once, said nothing. But she noticed the way his fingers flexed on the steering wheel. The ballroom was a hall of light and whispers. Chandeliers trembled above the laughter of men who smiled too wide and women who measured each other in glances. They entered together, but they didn't stay together. He was pulled into conversation, an investor from Berlin, a partner from New York. Maybelle watched from the periphery, sipping champagne like water, nodding politely at questions about the renovation of the Lawrence estate. No one asked what she liked, only what she was. A wife, a placeholder, a symbol. Then she saw her. Tall, blonde, grace in motion, laughing into Damien's shoulder like she belonged there. Her hand brushed his chest, lightly but not accidentally. And Damien, stoic, unmoved Damien, didn't pull away. Maybelle's hand tightened around her glass. She didn't approach. She didn't demand explanation. That wasn't who she was. But something inside her shifted. That night in the car, Damien didn't speak. Maybelle stared out the window, face unreadable, hands in her lap. "She's an old friend," he said at a red light. No name, no apology. "Friends touch like that?" His jaw flexed. It meant nothing. Maybelle turned to him, voice low. "Then I pity you." He didn't respond, didn't drive faster, didn't flinch. But he didn't sleep in the house that night, and Maybelle didn't ask where he went. The next morning, the newspapers ran a photo of them from the gala. "The Ice Couple," one caption read. "Paris's most lifeless love story." She folded the paper without reading the rest. That evening, she left the house. Not to run, not to rebel, just to be. Somewhere he wasn't. She walked the Seine alone, wrapped in a scarf Damien had never seen.
Ended up in a corner cafe in Montmartre where no one recognized her. A man sat at the table beside her, mid-30s, messy hair, charcoal-stained fingers, artist, probably. He asked if she was waiting for someone. She said no. They talked, briefly, about nothing. He complimented her eyes. She didn't correct him. She didn't give him her number, didn't kiss him. But when she returned home well after midnight, she knew something irreversible had occurred. Not between her and the stranger, between her and Damien. She had crossed an invisible line, not of fidelity, but of distance. And Damien knew. He didn't yell, didn't confront, but the air changed. He didn't join her for meals, canceled appearances they were meant to attend together. His silences turned brittle, his stares sharp. One evening, he answered the kitchen while she was finishing her tea. His gaze locked on hers, and something wordless passed between them. "Is this how it's going to be now?" he asked. "Is what?" "You disappear. You come back late. You stop answering my messages." "You never asked where I was." His voice dropped. "I didn't have to." She set her cup down. "Then don't pretend to be angry now." "I'm not angry," he said, but his eyes betrayed him. "I'm wondering who you've become. Someone you can't ignore." Silence roared between them. Then Damien stepped closer, not aggressive, not violent, just close enough that she could feel the heat rolling off him. "If you're going to make a point, Maybelle," he said, "make it. Don't play games." Her voice was quiet, but it cut like glass. "I'm not the one who started this." He stared at her for a long time, then turned and left the room. Later that night, she heard the front door open, then close. Again. That became their pattern. Tension in every breath, accusation in every silence. They were no longer strangers. They were combatants. And beneath the fighting, beneath the ice, beneath the pride, was something darker. Something neither of them could name yet. Something neither wanted to admit. They wanted to hurt each other because they were beginning to care. What followed was not war in the conventional sense. No shouted accusations, no shattered glass, no dramatic ultimatums. It was worse. It was silence laced with venom, distance sharpened into blades. Every glance a veiled confrontation, and every word, when spoken, a loaded weapon. Damien and Maybelle had once orbited each other without friction. Now their movement sparked friction at every pass, sparks that smoldered beneath the surface, igniting nothing, yet threatening to burn everything. Damien stopped sleeping at the estate for days at a time. No explanations, no notes. His absence wasn't avoidance, it was punishment. A signal. He would not compete. He would not chase. But Maybelle wasn't running. She'd stopped waiting up at night, stopped glancing toward the front gate when cars slowed on the street. She returned to her garden, to her sketches, to the quiet projects she'd started before he entered her world. But now the stillness didn't soothe her. It pulsed, tight and aching in her chest. She hated that it affected her, hated that his opinion, his presence, had become an axis in her day. She was supposed to be stronger than that, independent, free. But the truth twisted like a thorn in her gut. She missed him. Not the man he pretended to be, the cold, calculated CEO, but the one who had chosen her garden to walk through in the early morning,
who had placed architecture books on her desk without a word, who had studied her sketches like they were blueprints to something only he understood. The man who once made her feel seen, even when he said nothing at all. And now he was a ghost in his own home. When he returned after one of his unexplained absences, Maybelle didn't speak. She walked past him in the hall without pause, her chin lifted, her face blank. That night, as she tried to read in the library, he entered without knocking. "Who is he?" She didn't look up. "What?" "The man you've been spending time with." She turned a page slowly. "You've been gone 4 nights. That's a bold question. I asked you something." And I didn't answer. He crossed the room in 3 strides and took the book from her hands, not violently, but firmly, deliberate. Their eyes met. "He's no one," she said at last, "just someone who noticed me." His jaw clenched. "Noticed you?" "Yes, it happens." He stepped back, like her words had struck him in the chest. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. Her voice was low, trembling only at the edges. "Because I am not a wallflower in your hallway, Damien. I am not your business arrangement. I'm your wife, whether you wanted one or not. I told you, yes, you told me everything up front. No sentiment, no romance, just duty. But you didn't say I had to be invisible." The silence between them was deafening. Then his voice dropped, quieter than she'd ever heard it. "You were never invisible." She stared at him, blinking once. Her breath caught, briefly, but she forced her voice to stay even. "Then why do you treat me like I am?" "I don't." "You do." She stepped closer, the heat in her rising now. "You ignore me until someone else sees me. You disappear and expect me to remain loyal to your absence. And when I speak, you listen like it's a threat." He didn't move. "Damien," she said softly, "I didn't marry you to change you, but I won't let you erase me either." There it was, the line drawn in sand. He looked at her, something raw flickering in his eyes. "I never wanted to hurt you," he said. "But you did." He nodded, slow and grim. "Yes." And then he turned and left. Not with fury, not with indifference. With something worse. Regret. The next morning, a package arrived from Maybelle. No note, just a small black velvet box. Inside, it was a ring. Not the one from their wedding, the cold, thin band chosen by a lawyer. This one was emerald cut, heavy, vintage. It had once belonged to Damien's mother. Maybelle stared at it for a long time, her heart a thrum of contradiction. It wasn't an apology, it was a memory. A part of himself handed over without instruction. She closed the box. That afternoon, they passed each other in the corridor. He paused. So did she. He didn't ask if she'd received it. She didn't thank him. But something thawed. A flicker. A crack. The change wasn't immediate, but it came. In the form of Damien waiting for her after her meetings, of Maybelle asking him to join her at the garden bench for coffee, of dinners eaten in silence that wasn't tense, but tentative, like 2 people learning the sound of their own voices again. They began to talk, not of business, not of art, of before. He told her about the night his mother left, how she walked out while he was still asleep, left only a letter that said, "I never wanted this life." He was 16. He told her about the brother he used to protect, the accident, the funeral, the weight of blame that hadn't left his spine since. She told him about her first sketchbook, how she'd stolen it from Henry when she was 10 and filled it with imaginary buildings and doors that led to nowhere. She told him about how her father used to call her Mouse and how, eventually, she started living like one. Damien listened, really listened. And then, one night, it happened. A kiss. Not cinematic, not planned. They were standing in the kitchen. It was late. She was barefoot. He handed her tea. She looked up, and he was closer than usual, watching her, like he hadn't allowed himself to in weeks. "I miss this," she whispered. "This?" he asked, voice barely a breath. "You, when you're like this." He didn't answer. He kissed her. Slow, careful. Not a claiming, not a promise. A question. She kissed him back like an answer. That night, they didn't sleep in separate wings, and neither of them ran. But as with all fragile things, peace never lasts. 3 days later, Damien's phone rang while they were having breakfast. He stepped away to take the call. Maybelle didn't listen, didn't pry, until she heard one name. Clarice. She froze. The woman from the gala. She rose from the table, crossed the hall, stood just close enough to hear. "If you're serious about salvaging this acquisition, you'll need to appear beside someone who doesn't look like a ghost," the voice snapped through the speaker. "The board doesn't trust your wife. They don't see fire. They see liability." Pause. Damien said nothing. Then, after a moment, "And what do you suggest?" Maybelle's breath caught. Clarice's voice turned velvet sharp. "Appear with me. Just once. Give the market a reason to believe you're stable, that you're choosing strength, not sentiment." Silence. "You can always divorce later." Maybelle turned before she could hear his answer. She didn't sleep that night, didn't wait to see if he came to bed. She packed a bag the next morning and left. No note, no drama, just a clean cut. Because if Damien couldn't defend her when no one else would, then no amount of garden kisses or mother's rings would fix it. Some silences couldn't be warmed, and some ghosts had to stop haunting houses that never wanted them. He didn't look for her right away, not out of pride, not anger, but because Damien Moreau had never been left before. Not by employees, not by investors, and certainly not by a woman. He didn't chase. He didn't explain. In his world, those who left him did so permanently, and he let them. So for the first 3 days, he did what he always did in the face of emotional chaos. He worked. Meetings, press releases, numbers. He flew to Zurich, then Berlin, then back to Paris. When the Clarice situation surfaced again, her suggestion to make a public appearance at a partner gala, he declined curtly, flatly, finally. "That door is closed," he told her. But it wasn't until he returned home to the empty echo of the estate that he realized the truth. The door Maybelle had closed had been the only one left open in him. Her scent was gone from the halls. The sketches were missing from her study. Even the garden had changed, the herbs wilting, the vines untrimmed, a slow regression into silence. Umbra padded restlessly through the house at night, nose to floor, searching for her. So did Damien. He didn't know where she had gone. She hadn't told anyone, not her mother, not the staff, not even Henri. She'd simply disappeared, like a memory retreating into fog.
A week passed, then 2. On the 15th day, a photo surfaced online. It wasn't scandalous. It wasn't staged. Just a candid. Maybelle standing on the steps of a community center in Belleville, speaking to a group of young women. She wore a linen blouse, her hair pinned back, sleeves rolled. She wasn't smiling, but she looked alive. Damien stared at the image for a long time.
He called Lucien. "She's working with a foundation," Lucien said. "Started last week. Quietly. No press, no fanfare. It's focused on helping underprivileged girls find housing and employment training." Damien's fingers tightened around the phone. "She's building something," Lucien added. "On her own." "Good," Damien said, though his voice betrayed him. That night, he stood alone in her former study. He hadn't entered it since she left. Dust coated the windowsills. The chair was slightly askew. He sat, and for the first time in years, Damien Moreau did not feel powerful. He felt small, human. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the velvet ring box, the one that once held his mother's ring. It was empty now. She had taken the ring with her, not out of spite, but out of memory. He should have chosen her, not just in silence, not just in private, publicly, loudly, unapologetically. 3 days later, Maybelle was in the middle of sorting supply boxes in the foundation's makeshift storage room when a knock echoed down the hallway. She didn't look up. "Tell whoever it is we're closed for the day," she called out. The intern peeked in, eyes wide. May? You might want to come out here." She sighed, wiping her hands on her skirt, brushing her hair back into place. When she stepped into the foyer, she stopped, dead in her tracks. Damien stood there, in his usual black suit, no coat, no umbrella. Rain glistened on his shoulders, droplets trailing down his temples, like he walked here from somewhere far away, which, knowing him, he probably had. Maybelle. Her name in his voice hit differently now, rougher, quieter, less like a summons, more like a confession. She didn't move. "What are you doing here?" "I came to see you." "I'm working. I'll wait." She blinked. "I don't want a scene." "There won't be one." The intern quietly disappeared. Maybelle crossed her arms. "Why now?" He hesitated. "I didn't know how much I'd failed you," he said finally, "until you left." She exhaled. "You didn't fail me, Damien. You just never chose me." "I did. Not when it counted." The words hit him like open palm to skin, quiet but stinging. He stepped forward. "I was afraid," he said, and it almost didn't sound like him. "Of what?" "That if I let myself care, I'd lose control. That if I showed them you mattered, they'd use you to destroy me. So I stayed silent. And in doing that, I destroyed the one thing I wanted to protect." She looked away. He continued, voice lower now. "I told you once I don't offer love. I thought that was honesty. I thought that was strength. But the truth is, I didn't know how to love. Not really. Not until you left." Tears threatened at the edges of her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. "You hurt me," she whispered. "I know. You embarrassed me. I know. You let her speak about me like I was nothing."
He took another step closer. But you're not nothing. You never were. And if I have to spend the rest of my life proving that to you, I will. She didn't answer right away. Then, why the ring? He blinked. The one from your mother. Why give me something so personal if you couldn't be vulnerable with me? He swallowed. Because I was trying, in the only way I knew how. I gave you the thing that meant the most to me. I thought that was enough. And now? Now I know it wasn't. A long silence settled between them. Outside, the rain picked up, tapping against the windows like an old song. She looked at him, truly looked at him. Gone was the armor, the distance, the curated precision of Damien Moreau. What stood before her now was a man who had lost something and realized it too late. Or maybe just in time. "Come back with me," he said. "Not to the house, not to the contract. To me, whatever that means. We'll figure it out together." She shook her head. He tensed. But then she spoke again. "I'm not going back." His chest caved slightly. "But," she continued, "if you're willing to come forward, I'll meet you." He blinked. "What do you mean?" "I'm not stepping back into your world, Damien. I'm building my own. But if you want to walk beside me, not ahead of me, not behind me, then yes, I'm willing." He let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. And for the first time in his life, Damien Moreau nodded without needing to win. "Then I'm staying." Over the next weeks, he did just that. He didn't barge in, didn't take over. He showed up, carried boxes, sat in the back during foundation meetings, listened. At first, the staff whispered. Then they adjusted. Then they began to accept that this tall, unsmiling man who brewed Maybelle's tea exactly how she liked it might not be an intruder, but part of the story. On the 34th day since she left him, Damien knelt in the center of the community garden she had helped build. No crowd, no press. Just her. He held up the same ring, this time without armor. "Marry me again," he said, "but only if it's your idea." She didn't cry. She smiled and took the ring. Not as a concession, as a choice. It would have made sense if that had been the end. A quiet reproposal in a garden she'd helped plant. A ring that once belonged to a woman who ran, now given to one who stayed. Damien on one knee and Maybelle reaching down to lift him. But real stories, especially the kind forged from frost and fire, never end where the light first appears. They had learned how to find each other. Now they had to learn how to keep each other. In the months that followed, Damien did something no one in his circle expected. He stepped down. Not from the company entirely, but from the apex. He handed day-to-day control to the new CEO and moved into a strategic advisory role. Whispers flooded the boardrooms. Had he lost his edge? Had his wife softened him? Was this the beginning of the end for Moreau Global? He didn't answer. He let them talk. What they didn't understand was this. Power without purpose was just performance. And Damien Moreau was done performing. He and Maybelle bought a new house. Not in St. Cloud, not in the Laurent estate, in Montserrat. It was modest by their standards. 3 stories, old stone, vines already claiming the back walls. She designed the interiors herself. He installed her library shelves by hand. They didn't throw lavish parties. They didn't issue statements. They simply lived together. Maybelle resumed her foundation work with new clarity. She launched the mentorship program for young women pursuing architecture and urban planning, something she would have needed when she was their age but never had. Damien, to everyone's surprise, started teaching, one seminar a month at a small business school on leadership through restraint. He never advertised it. Students simply showed up. One afternoon in late spring, Maybelle stood on the second-floor balcony, watching as Damien helped a group of teenage boys haul lumber for a shelter project. He didn't know she was watching. He wasn't posturing, just being. Shoulders rolled back, sleeves pushed up, eyes focused.
He looked nothing like the man she'd first met, and yet he was exactly the same. She smiled. Their second wedding had no contract, no guest list, just them. It took place in a public garden with no podium and no priest. She wore cream, he wore dark navy. Umbra trotted between their feet. No one officiated. They spoke their vows quietly, just above a whisper. Damien went first. I thought love was a transaction, that giving meant control and needing meant weakness. I built walls around every inch of my life to protect myself from ever feeling that way again. But then you walked in and didn't ask to knock them down. You just waited, watered the cracks, let light in. Mabel didn't cry, but her lip trembled. My vow, he said, is to never make you invisible again. Not to them, not to me, not to yourself. Then her turn. I spent so much of my life believing I had to earn attention, that to be quiet meant to be small. And when you first met me, I was the version of myself that knew how to disappear best. But you, without even trying, forced me to see that I was always meant to be seen. She placed her hand on his chest. My vow is this: I will never shrink again. And I will never let you disappear behind silence either. They kissed, not for the first time, but for the first time without fear. Months later, the press caught wind of the marriage again. But this time, they weren't interested in the lack of spectacle. They were obsessed with how the couple had become an enigma: private, present, powerful. People whispered about how Maybelle handled a disgruntled donor at a gala without raising her voice. How Damien turned down a billion-euro merger because the company's ethics didn't align with the foundation's mission. Together, they weren't just respected, they were undeniable. But they never chased that. They chased mornings together, a shared crossword, gardening on Sundays, walks without bodyguards, dinner in sweatpants. Realness. One evening, while watching a thunderstorm from their kitchen window, Damien reached for her hand. Do you ever think about the first contract? He asked. Maybelle smirked. The one where you promised nothing and I accepted it? He chuckled. I think about how naive I was, how sure I was that if I kept everything tidy and predictable, I could stay safe. She leaned her head on his shoulder. We were both hiding. You just had better walls. You had better endurance. He kissed her forehead. Outside, the rain hit the windows like memory. But inside, the house was warm. Their last scene together, the one history would never see, was at another event, years later. Maybelle stood at the edge of the crowd, scanning a room of young women she was mentoring. She spotted Damien at the far side, speaking with an old rival who now deferred to him, not out of fear, but respect. He looked up, found her in the crowd, and smiled. She walked toward him, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. And this time, when she reached him, there was no silence between them, only knowing. The arranged marriage had long ended. What remained now, what stood tall and lived and breathed and bloomed between them, was a marriage chosen, earned, built together. If this story moved you, share it with someone who still believes love must look a certain way. And remember, sometimes the strongest marriages aren't the ones that start with sparks, but the ones rebuilt from silence into something real. Subscribe for more stories that don't just entertain, but make you feel.